The unannounced visit story began on a quiet Saturday morning when the city was just waking up. Cars rolled slowly along the streets, children played in the distance, and the warm sun painted the sky with soft light. But while the world moved at its usual pace, Keanu Reeves felt something stirring inside him. For years he had been admired on screens, followed by cameras, and praised for his kindness. But behind that public image, he remained a man who valued simplicity and truth. He had always believed that respect was not measured by wealth, but by how one treated those who were often unseen. That morning, without calling ahead, without sending a driver, Keanu decided to visit someone who had quietly worked in his home for nearly a decade, his maid Maria. She had been more than just someone who cleaned his floors and washed his clothes. She was a woman of quiet strength, always polite, always gentle, but carrying stories in her eyes that she never shared. He had seen the way her hands trembled sometimes when she thought no one was looking, or how she often smiled even when her eyes seemed heavy with worry. Keanu drove himself, an old car that blended into the traffic, because he did not want this visit to feel grand. He wanted it to be real. When he arrived at the modest neighborhood where Maria lived, he parked on the side of the narrow street. Her house was small, its paint faded, the garden wild with weeds, but there was a warmth to it, a quiet dignity. Children's drawings were taped to the windows. A pair of worn shoes rested by the door. He hesitated for a moment, wondering. If he was intruding, he was, after all, a guest unannounced. But something deep inside urged him forward. Perhaps it was the memory of how often Maria had asked about his well-being, not as an employer, but as a human being. Perhaps it was the guilt of never asking enough about hers. When he knocked, the door opened slowly, and what he saw froze him where he stood. Maria stood there, not in her uniform, but in a plain dress with tired eyes. Behind her, the small living room revealed more than words ever could. A boy, no older than 8, sat at the table, trying to fix a broken toy with tape. An elderly woman with graying hair, perhaps Maria's mother, coughed softly in the corner while folding laundry. The walls were lined with cracks, the furniture worn thin, and the air smelled faintly of medicine. Maria gasped when she saw him. "Mr. Reeves, you're here?" she stammered, her hands trembling. Keanu offered a small smile. "Call me Keanu, please," he said gently. "May I come in?" She stepped aside, nervous, embarrassed perhaps, but unable to refuse. As he entered, he felt the weight of the room press against him, not because of its poverty, but because of the strength it carried. Every corner told a story of sacrifice. Every detail whispered of resilience. The boy looked up, his eyes wide when he recognized the man from the movies. But he quickly looked down again, shy and quiet. Keanu sat on a worn chair and looked around. "Maria," he said softly, "you have worked for me for years. You've taken care of my home. But I never asked enough about yours. Today I wanted to see for myself. I wanted to know your world." Maria's eyes filled with tears. She tried to hold back. She shook her head. "My world is small, sir, not worth your time." But those words only deepened the silence in Keanu's chest. Because what he saw was not small, it was powerful. It was human. It was real. And he was about to discover that behind Maria's quiet smile was a story that would change not only his view of her, but of himself and of life itself. Asterisk behind. The smell of Maria's hands trembled as she poured tea into 2 chipped cups. The steam rose gently, but her eyes kept flicking toward her son and her mother, as if she was afraid their struggles might be exposed. Keanu noticed everything: the careful way she tried to hide the broken furniture with a folded cloth, the way she placed the better of the 2 cups in front of him while keeping the cracked one for herself. Even in her own home, her instinct was to give, not to take. He sipped the tea quietly, letting the silence stretch, not rushing her to speak. He knew that sometimes silence was the only way to earn truth. After a while, he turned to the boy. "What's your name?" Keanu asked softly. The boy hesitated, then whispered, "Daniel." Keanu smiled. "Daniel, what are you fixing?" The boy held up the toy, its arm dangling by tape. "It's my robot. It's broke, but I can make it work again." His voice was small, but his determination was strong. Keanu leaned closer, studying. The toy, you know, when things break, it doesn't mean they're useless. Sometimes it just means they need a little more care. Sometimes they come back even stronger. Daniel looked at him with wide eyes, as if those words carried more weight than just about a toy. Maria's eyes filled again, but she quickly turned away, busying herself with the tea kettle. Keanu set his cup down and looked at her. Maria, you've been carrying a lot, haven't you? She froze, her back to him, her shoulders stiff. Then slowly she turned. I didn't want you to see this. My job with you pays fair, more than fair. But life has been hard. My mother is sick. Medicine is expensive. Daniel's school needs fees I cannot always afford. So I work and I smile, because that is what I know how to do. Words broke something inside Keanu. Here was a woman who cleaned his home, who made sure his world stayed in order, while her own world was falling apart quietly in the background. She had never asked for help, never complained, never hinted at her struggles. She had chosen dignity over pity. The elderly woman coughed again, her frail hands folding laundry with slow patience. Daniel sat quietly, looking between his mother and Keanu, too young to understand everything, but old enough to sense the weight in the room. Keanu leaned forward, his voice steady, kind. Maria, you've given so much of yourself, and yet you've kept all of this hidden. Why didn't you tell me? She lowered her eyes. Because, sir, everyone has struggles. Mine are no greater than others. And I didn't want you to think less of me. Keanu shook his head slowly. I don't think less of you. I think more. Much more. The silence that followed was heavy, but not empty. It was filled with unspoken truths and respect that needed no words. But deep inside, Keanu felt something stir and ache, a responsibility. A realization that his visit was no accident. He'd come here by instinct, and now he understood why. He was about to uncover a story of sacrifice, resilience, and love that would not only change Maria's life, but also transform his own understanding of what it truly meant to live with kindness. The truth unfolds. Air inside the small house felt heavier as Maria lowered herself into a chair. Her hands twisted together in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor, as though speaking her truth might somehow make her weaker. But Keanu leaned closer, his calm presence inviting her to continue. He did not press, he simply waited, and that patience gave her strength. Finally, Maria took a shaky breath. When I first came to work for you, my life was already hard. My husband had left, and I was raising Daniel alone. My mother was already sick, and I needed money for her medicine. I was ashamed, but the job you offered me was honest, I promised. Myself, I would never let my troubles follow me into your home. I wanted you to see only good work, never my pain. Her voice cracked, and her eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. But over the years it became harder. Daniel grew, and with him came school fees, uniforms, books I could not always buy. My mother's health worsened. The doctors told me she needed treatment we could not afford. Sometimes I cleaned your home after working a second job at night. Sometimes I came to your house smiling, but inside I was so tired I thought I would fall apart. Keanu's chest ached as he listened. He had always admired Maria for her quiet discipline, her never-failing reliability. But now he realized that her strength came from a place of sacrifice so deep it nearly broke her. He thought about the times he had thanked her politely at the door, never once knowing she would return home to care for her sick mother and her lonely child. Daniel sat quietly at the table, watching his mother with wide, uncertain eyes. He seemed to understand that something important was being shared, even if he could not grasp all the details. He held his broken toy tighter, as if it was a symbol of his small world trying to stay together. Keanu turned his gaze toward Maria's mother, the elderly woman folding laundry with shaky hands. He noticed the way her breathing caught every few moments, the way she tried to hide her cough behind a smile. She met his eyes for a brief second, and in them he saw both gratitude and worry. The look of a woman who had carried her family through storms and now depended on her daughter to carry her. Keanu's single quotes, his voice was soft but firm. Maria, you should never feel ashamed of your struggle. You've been carrying more than most people could, and yet you've done it with dignity. But you don't have to carry it alone anymore." Maria shook her head quickly, fear flashing in her eyes. "Please, sir, I don't want pity. I don't want charity. I only want to work and earn honestly. That is enough." Keanu leaned forward, his eyes steady, his tone respectful. "I am not offering pity. I am offering respect. Respect means seeing you for all that you aren't just the maid who keeps my home clean, but the woman who keeps her family alive. You are more than your work. And if there is any way I can help, it is not charity. It is honor." Maria's lips trembled, and she pressed her hand to her mouth to hold back a sob. For years, she had hidden her pain behind quiet smiles, but now in her small living room, a man the world called a star was looking at her not as an employee, not as someone beneath him, but as an equal, as a human being worthy of dignity. The room fell into silence again, but it was no longer heavy with shame. It was heavy with something new hope, fragile but real. And in that silence, Maria realized that the walls she had built around her struggles were beginning to break. Not in weakness, but in trust. But what none of them knew was that the greatest trial was still ahead. Because even as Keanu spoke of respect and honor, Maria was hiding a truth even deeper, a truth she had never dared to share with anyone. And when that truth came out, it would test every promise of kindness and change both their lives forever. Asterisk the hidden secret soft ticking of the old clock filled the silence in Maria's living room. Outside, the neighborhood carried on, children playing, neighbors chatting, but inside, the air was heavy with the weight of what had been shared. Keanu sat quietly, his hands folded, waiting. He had seen enough in life to know that sometimes the deepest truths come only when silence is given space. Maria's eyes flicked toward her son, then her mother, then back down to her lap. She hesitated, her lips trembling, as if torn between fear and relief. "There is something I never told you," she whispered finally, her voice so soft that even Daniel leaned closer to hear. Keanu gave a small nod, encouraging her. "You can tell me, Maria? Whatever it is, I will listen." She gripped the edge of her dress tightly. "I have a debt, a large one. Years ago, when my mother's illness grew worse, I borrowed money from men who promised help. But their help was poison. The interest grew, and when I could not pay, they threatened me. I have been paying them for years, quietly, in fear. Most of what I earn goes to them. That is why this house looks this way. That is why Daniel has so little. I was too ashamed to tell anyone, and now they have given me a final warning. I don't pay them soon. They said they will take everything. Even Daniel." Her words broke, and the room shook with her sobs. Daniel's small hands tightened around his toy, his eyes wide with fear. The elderly mother's cough grew harsher, but she tried to stand, placing a shaky hand on Maria's shoulder to steady her. Keanu's jaw tightened, his calm face shadowed with quiet anger, not at Maria, but at the cruelty that had cornered her. He had seen greed in Hollywood, corruption in business, but this was different. This was a quiet war against the powerless, against those who lived in silence and dignity. He leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "Maria, you should never have had to carry this alone. Threats like these are not just unfair, they are evil. But hear me now, they will not take your son. They will not take your mother. Not while I am here." Maria shook her head, tears streaming. "No, sir, you don't understand. These men are dangerous. If they see you here, if they know you are helping me, they will come after you too. I cannot let that happen." But Keanu's eyes burned with determination. "I have faced many things in my life, but nothing makes me angrier than seeing good people suffer in silence. You are not alone anymore, Maria. Not in this." The boy Daniel looked up at Keanu then, his small voice trembling but filled with hope. "Mr. Reeves, will you really protect us?" Keanu turned to him and smiled gently. "Yes, Daniel, I promise." The boy's eyes lit up, holding onto those words as if they were the strongest shield in the world. Maria's sobs quieted, her mother's trembling eased slightly. The first time in years, the weight pressing on their small home seemed lighter. But even as hope filled the room, danger already lurked outside. Maria's debtors had grown impatient. They'd been watching the house, waiting for weakness. And now, as Keanu sat in the living room, making a promise of protection, a dark car rolled slowly down the street, its tinted windows hiding the faces. Inside, the real test of courage was coming, and this time, it would not be hidden behind quiet words. It would arrive at Maria's door with force. The knock at the door, the soft chatter of the street faded when the dark car came to a stop outside Maria's house. Its engine hummed low, menacing, like a predator waiting in the shadows. Inside, the small family sat frozen, unaware that the promise Keanu had made was about to be tested sooner than anyone imagined. Maria's mother noticed first, glancing toward the window with worried eyes. Her hands trembled as she whispered, "They are here." Maria's face drained of color. She rushed to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see. Two men stepped out of the car, tall, broad, wearing dark jackets that carried the weight of violence. Their expressions were cold, their movements deliberate. They weren't just coming to talk. They had come to remind Maria of her fear. Her breath caught. "Please, sir, you must leave," she said to Keanu, her voice desperate. "If they see you here, they will not stop. They will ruin you, too. Please go before they come in." But Keanu shook his head calmly, rising from his chair with steady resolve. "Maria, I gave you my word. I will not leave. Your fight is mine now." The knock on the door came loud, sharp, a sound that rattled the small house and made Daniel flinch. The boy clung to his mother's dress, his toy robot falling to the floor. Maria's eyes filled with tears. She had faced these men before, but never with her son so close. Never with her secret fully revealed. Keanu placed a hand gently on Daniel's shoulder. "Stay behind your mother," he said softly. Then, turning toward the door, his eyes hardened. The knock came again, louder this time. One of the men's voices thundered through the wood. "Maria, we know you're in there. Shh. You think you can hide? Today is the day you pay." Maria's hands shook as she reached for the lock, but Keanu stepped forward, his calm voice stopping her. "Let me open it." Her lips parted in protest, but something in his steady gaze silenced her. With quiet strength, Keanu pulled the door open. The two men outside froze for half a second when they saw him standing there. They had expected fear, a trembling woman. Instead, they faced a tall figure whose calm presence carried more weight than their threats. One man sneered. "Who are you?" Keanu's voice was steady, firm. "A friend." And from this moment, Maria is not alone. The men exchanged glances, then smirked. "You don't know who you're dealing with," one of them growled. "She owes us more than she can ever pay. And if she can't, we'll take something else." That's how it works. Keanu's jaw tightened, but he did not raise his voice. "Not anymore. You will leave this house. You will not touch her, her son, or her mother. If you try, the world will know your faces, your names, your crimes, and you will lose everything." His calmness rattled them more than shouting ever could. One man tried to step forward, but Keanu didn't flinch. His stillness was power. Silence was louder than their threats. Behind him, Daniel peeked from the doorway, his small voice breaking the tension. "Leave my mom alone." The boy's words pierced the air, simple but brave. And in that moment, the men realized something: this family, once broken and afraid, was no longer weak. They were no longer alone. The men backed away slowly, muttering threats, but their confidence had cracked. The presence of Keanu Reeves, the unwavering defiance in his eyes, had shifted the balance. They returned to their car, slamming the door shut, the engine roaring as they sped down the street. Maria collapsed into a chair, shaking, tears streaming down her face. She covered her mouth, unable to believe what had just happened. Daniel ran to her, clinging to her side. Her mother whispered a prayer of gratitude, her frail hands trembling less than before. Keanu stood by the door, his eyes still fixed on the street where the car had disappeared. He knew it wasn't over. Men like that did not give up so easily. But he also knew this Maria's life had changed. Fear that had lived in her home for years had been broken. And from this day forward, she would never face it alone. The life forever changed Teth. House was quiet again, but it was not the same silence. It was heavier, charged with the echo of what had just happened. Maria sat trembling, her arms wrapped tightly around Daniel, as if holding him close could erase the years of fear that had haunted them. Her mother's eyes glistened, her frail hands still pressed together in prayer. Keanu stood near the door, his eyes fixed on the street where the black car had vanished. He knew men like that. They thrived on fear. They fed on silence. If Maria had faced them alone again, they would have returned, bolder each time, until they took everything. But now things were different. He had stepped into their world, and he would not walk away until it was safe. Maria's voice finally broke the silence. "Why did you do this for me?" she whispered.
Ow!
"You could have turned away, pretended not to see. It would have been easier." Keanu turned, his face soft but steady, because no one deserves to live in fear. Because you've spent years carrying burdens you should never have carried alone. And because respect means more than polite words. Means standing with someone when the world is against them. Her tears flowed harder then, but they were no longer only tears of fear. There was relief in them, and a glimmer of hope. The following days moved quickly. True to his word, Keanu did not let Maria face her troubles alone. He made calls, used his voice, and quietly pulled together lawyers and community advocates who specialized in protecting families from predatory lenders. The men who had threatened her were exposed for their crimes, their names dragged into the light. Within weeks, they were facing justice. Maria's debt, once a shadow that consumed her every breath, was erased. But what mattered more than the legal battle was what happened inside her small home. Daniel laughed more freely, no longer carrying the fear that had once haunted his young eyes. Her mother's health improved not just because of medicine, because the weight of constant worry had finally been lifted. Through it all, Keanu visited often, not as a celebrity, not as an employer, but as a friend. He shared meals with them at the same small table, played games with Daniel, and listened to Maria's stories of her childhood. He reminded them with every gesture that their dignity was not defined by wealth, but by love, sacrifice, and resilience. And slowly Maria began to see herself differently too. She was no longer just the maid who worked quietly in the background of someone else's life. She was a mother who had fought for her son, a daughter who had cared for her mother, and a woman who had faced darkness with quiet courage. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the small house in golden light, Daniel climbed into Keanu's lap, his small arms wrapping around him. "You saved us," the boy whispered. Keanu smiled softly, shaking his head. "No, Daniel. Your mother saved you every single day. I just stood beside her when she needed someone." Maria stood by the window, her heart full. For years she had felt invisible, but now she knew her worth. And she knew that the moment Keanu had knocked on her door, everything had changed, not because of his fame, but because of his humanity. The story of that day spread quietly among neighbors and friends. But it was never told with glamour. It was told with respect, with awe at how kindness and courage could transform lives. And for KeanuReeves, the visit that began as a simple decision to check on someone who worked in his home became a turning point in his own heart. He had always believed in humility, but now he carried with him a deeper truth that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones the world overlooks. And the most powerful changes happen in the smallest of houses.